right, guys, going to be jumping into the top prop bets here for the Sunday Night Football game between the Las Vegas Raiders and the Pittsburgh Steelers. So getting into the game preview for this one, it is going to be a close game. That is the good part. 2.5 point spread. So that'll be fun. About a 43 for an over and under. Looking at the injury situation, not too much there on the Las Vegas Raiders front, thankfully. Okay, Jacoby Myers is going to be back, so hopefully that should help two things. One, it should help Josh Jacobs. He should have a little bit more room to run, just because I feel like having another pass catcher on the field should open up the field. That does depend a lot on Jimmy G and how he's playing, because if they're not respecting Jimmy G's arm, it's easier to key on the run game. Looking at the Pittsburgh Steelers, obviously Deontay Johnson is still out. That elevated Calvin Austin into a lot of snaps like we thought it would. We had George Pickens going off there, and then Allen Robinson just running sprints out there. Kind of the same expectation. So let's go ahead and get into these two teams. And let's start out with the Pittsburgh Steelers. We know that Kenny Pickett has been someone that has been struggling. And like just watching it, you've seen that. Film-wise, you've seen that. But this is by far going to be his best matchup. Like when we look at DVP, Raiders are a little bit better of a matchup for opposing quarterbacks than league average, but in comparison to the other two defenses, and he's part of the problem, but definitely going to be his easiest matchup of the season thus far. So I don't know if that's going to mean we're going to want to end up on any props for Kenny Pickett, but to me that does probably mean that we're going to end up on some props for some of his pass catchers. Now we'll start with Allen Robinson because he's right here. And really, let's just look at all the pass catchers. So last week for Pittsburgh, I have a filter for Pitt. Michael Pittman's being pulled in, whatever. You guys get it. We saw Allen Robinson play a lot of snaps. We saw George Pickens play a lot of snaps, and Calvin Austin. It was exclusively those three. That tells us we saw a lot of 11 personnel. And we did see a ton of targets get force-fed to who? George Pickens. Not too shocking there. We did see Allen Robinson come up with 3 targets, 2 receptions. That's kind of what I expected, especially with Kenny Pickett playing that poor. But I think the player that we probably want to be on the most is going to be Calvin Austin. Okay, does get that Sunday night game. He was someone that actually made my bet slip for Sunday Night Football as well, or for the Sunday slate in general. 2.5 receptions is going to be a good one there for him, especially if he is playing that many snaps. He was open, just need to find ways to get him the ball. And given that matchup, I expect that to occur. And we look at the snap counts for their 2 running backs. Najee Harris got 56, Jalen Warren got 43. I would say that's going to be the norm. I think we can expect that to continue to occur. I also think basically their production is what we can expect. Najee Harris will probably be the leader in rushing, whereas Jalen Warren will be the leader in receiving snaps. Both of them are going to draw a really good matchup this week, where the Las Vegas Raiders have given up the most points to opposing running backs. A lot of that's due to some really easy receptions. Now, they haven't given up too much yards, but 17 receptions to running backs is a lot. So maybe we're looking at Jalen Warren there instead. This should be a pretty good game for Najee Harris as well. I mentioned Kenny Pickett drew his toughest matchups of the season. Well, that is true for Najee Harris as well. And guys, I like to do that process first so that when we pull up the cheat sheet, we're not really shocked at any of the props that we are getting. So when we see Allen Robinson for under fantasy score, to me, that makes more sense with how he looked and really the usage that he's getting. That makes sense. I don't know if I really want to touch the under receptions, although we can see that is going to be a good EV bet. We are getting some good EV bets as it sits right now. Receiving yards for George Pickens. We can see some big discrepancies here, guys. 3.5 yards difference is kind of big, I would say. And once again, he does get a better matchup this week as well. I think good chance for him to get that over. Pat Freiermuth, I'm just not touching in general. I would probably want to bet the under there. Kenny Pickett, we're being told to bet the over. That's where we're getting the edge. I'm not touching that one. The one bet that we should really be going out of our way to make, though, is going to be Calvin Austin. I would say for over 2.5 receptions. Has a 54% chance to hit, so that's going to be a really good one in this game. So far, I mentioned like on the Thursday Night Football game where I'm so mad at Darren Waller. Buddy, catch the freaking pass. We went 2 for 3 because Darren Waller couldn't catch a pass, and also Daniel Jones sucks. That was unfortunate, but the process was correct, and it was much more of a slate in which we had to be sharp to produce good results. 2 out of 3 is good results. Whereas this slate, we are finding some really good EV bets where we don't actually have to like game the game. We can just play some of these good EV bets. We know in the long term that's going to be a good strategy. And so let's just pull up the Jalen Warren props because I am interested in the ones that we are getting. Probably not going with him for rushing yards. I would say receiving yards is going to be one of the better ones, whether we want to do a receiving based prop, whether we want to do receiving yards or receptions. That's going to be up to you guys. I would actually say the receptions prop is going to be one of the better ones just with how many receptions the Las Vegas Raiders have given up to opposing running backs. And then I do think this will finally be the week in which Najee Harris has a good game, but I will say, do I want to bet on that? I do not. Okay, so like maybe fantasy score if he falls into the end zone, but it'd be a better bet for the anytime touchdowns. Let's go ahead and get into Las Vegas side of the football, I'm excited to cover this. So guys, last week I mentioned that with Jacoby Myers out, Wilkerson would be a good value. And I got that partially right because he got a lot of snaps. Jimmy G was just tunnel vision to Devonte Adams, and that offense just was terrible in general, really after the first drive. It's weird because the first drive, they look really good. Their offense did look good, though, there with Jacoby Myers, and we're looking at the receiving yards here, guys. I like this prop. Let's go ahead and look at the week 1 stats for Jacoby Myers. So in week 1, and let's just sort by that. Well, we'll show you guys week 2. Wilkerson, I am so mad about that because, like, a lot of people were going with Hunter Renfrow, which almost kind of correct as well, but I'm like, no, it's gonna be Wilkerson. He is the Jacoby Myers replacement. That was true. It's just apparently you can't replace Jacoby Myers production because in week 1 he had 80% of the snap, and I think we're going to see more of that. Obviously Devonte Adams is going to be playing the most, but Jacoby Myers in that game really went off, and that's not too shocking. I would say 10 targets, 9 receptions, 81 receiving yards, 29.1 fantasy points. That's obviously surprising because he had 2 touchdowns, but he is that type of player. Like, he's not the touchdown part, but the receptions player, the move the sticks player, the short yardage guy. He has always been that player with the Patriots. They paid him real money to do that for the Raiders as well. So to me, that was no shock. And so for me, I think we can go in on Jacoby Myers in some capacity. And the nice part about Jacoby Myers is we could do either receiving yards or fantasy points. This is one of those situations where I actually don't mind fantasy points for him. If he's going to get 50 receiving yards, that's halfway there. I think he has a good chance to get, 5 receptions or so. And I think that's why they're only giving us like the receiving targets instead as a prop, as opposed to receptions. So the best one that we got right now is either receiving yards or fantasy points. Up to you guys which one you want to roll with there. And then from there, we do see that, maybe a slight edge for Jimmy G for over fantasy score. I will say did look much better than he did in week 1 than he did in week 2. It just seemed to be a thing where without Myers there, that offense strangely didn't flow. But I guess when you go from, Myers, a pretty decent NFL receiver, to a bunch of okay backup type players, not going to be good for you. And Buffalo, pretty good defense. It seemed like Denver is not going to be that good of a defense. Pittsburgh, we're the questions out on them. So Jimmy G, I do think, could struggle. Interestingly enough, the Pittsburgh Steelers defense has really struggled. Now, that cutback run by Jerome Ford was really good, but you could say it's a little bit lucky, although Nick Chubb was having his way with them as well. Guys, Josh Jacobs has looked good. He has looked like himself. The defensive schemes that we have seen have adjusted because they don't trust Jimmy G to be able to beat them. So they're like, let's shut down Jacobs and have Jimmy G beat us. That could continue again, but once again, I think with Jacoby Myers there, it does open up the field. So where we're getting this Josh Jacobs prop for, fantasy score for over it, I could see that being a decent one, although it's basically a push. This is very much touchdown dependent. I would say the rush yards probably correct. Like, I don't think we're getting any big prop edges with Josh Jacobs at all. Maybe receiving yards, but I think with Jacoby Myers there, we're going to see less production to him in the receiving game. And I think that does correlate. Like, his targets went from 6 to 3. Now, a little bit different of a game flow. I get that. That could be part of it. But to me, that was more Jacoby Myers being gone. And now lastly, let's just take a quick peek at Devonte Adams here. So fantasy score. Seems to be a decent edge that we're getting here. Basically, the sportsbooks are favoring the over. They're favoring the over at 16.3, projected to get 18.4 fantasy points. So the 15.5 is a pretty good line that we're getting there. The worry would be is that the Steelers, haven't been great against the pass, but haven't been terrible. Basically, middle of the road. We can see a lot of teams are around that 40 to 35 DK points per game given up to opposing receivers. That being said, you would expect a player like Adams to be able to take advantage of a matchup that's not a huge negative. So, Jacoby Myers, I think fantasy points we could do. We could also do that for Devonte Adams. The question is, do we want to do both of them? Because if we are doing both of them, we should do Jimmy G, right? That's what I don't like. That's the struggle. So I'll show you guys the bet slip that we can do for this slate, and then it's whether or not you believe in Jimmy G. All right, so taking a peek at my favorite bets for this game, we have Calvin Austin. That's going to be one of the better EV bets that we are getting on this game. My only worry is that might be gone by the time you guys get there. Then we got George Pickens for over 50.5 receiving yards. Given the matchup, I do think that's going to be a good one. And then Jalen Warren, the Raiders do give up a lot of receiving yards and receptions to opposing running backs. And so we need Warren to get that 40% snap share that he has been getting. I do think he'll get that. And the thing that I like about these ones is that we're kind of telling a story about how the game's going to go. Maybe a little bit less of a defensive struggle, and that's kind of the bet here. And that's going to be a little bit more higher scoring than maybe Vegas thinks. If we are doing this is the struggle here that I have here, because I feel pretty good about these 3 bets. Obviously, we need to run it back then with a Raiders player or any other bet. Obviously, with it being a Sunday night football game, I'm trying to just give you guys props for that game. I like the Jacoby Myers receiving yards, 49.5. I think that's going to be the best one. So I'll just show you guys that slip. And I'll show you guys that right after this. But this is more a bet on Jimmy G not being terrible. And we did see that 2 of the better bets we were getting were Devonte Adams for over fantasy score and Jacoby Myers for over fantasy score. And if they both do that, then you expect Jimmy G to be able to get over there. Because if they are both doing it, then Jimmy G should be able to. I want to call this out as well. Like with Devonte Adams, if you take his receptions prop and his yards prop, that does not equal 15.5, because this is kind of a bet on him being able to score a touchdown. Okay. Where to me, if we are doing fantasy score for Devonte Adams, it makes sense then to pair that with Jimmy G, because that is essentially what we are betting, is that Jimmy G is going to throw a touchdown to Devonte Adams. Whereas with Jacoby Myers, it's not. It's a bet on his receiving yards. It's a bet on his receptions as well, because his touchdown equity is not being factored into that fantasy score. Now, if you guys hate that idea, here would be the simple bet that we can go with as long as it's there throughout the day. I will say these are going to be the 3 best bets on the slate. And then I just think Jalen Warren, I think game script wise, hopefully it'll be there for him. But if you guys are just looking for, 3 really good EV bets, 1, 2, 3 on the day, obviously you'd want to maybe make that bet on underdog instead, where it pays out better. That's going to be all for this video. If you guys want access to that 95 cheat sheet, link is going to be in the description below, just $10 a month. If you guys want access to that ODDSJAM Sportsbook screen, as well as all of their really good tools, click the link in the description below. Use the promo code 925, the number spelled out. Let's have a good slate. And as always, let's keep cashing.